Good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Jim MacDonald. I'm the Chief Executive of Architecture and Design Scotland, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to this afternoon's event, where we will be launching our Carbon Conscious Places report. We've got a wide range of sectors represented here today, local authorities, central government, community groups, education groups, you name it, they seem to be here. And I think that just underlines how important an issue this is for us all, and also I think how keen people are to work together and to learn more about how to work together to solve this kind of stuff. So I wanted to first of all start, and before we get on to the launch itself, with a little bit of background for those of you who don't maybe know as much about the project as some. It's very much a partnership between ourselves and Scottish Government and a series of local authorities. And things began when we were approached by the Energy and Climate Change Directorate of Scottish Government on the back of the publication of their climate change plan. Within that, there was a recognition that the built environment was a key battleground in tackling carbon emissions. And as such, as an agency that deals day to day with the built environment and its design, they asked us, could we help? And of course we said yes, we absolutely could, and we'd love to apply some of the methods that we know all about to that problem. So roll forward a year or so and a few £1,000 as well, and we've been able to do some amazing work testing some approaches across Scotland, and that's what you're going to hear today. So the report that we're launching shares the learning from this work, and I think I should stress that it is learning. We've not got all of the answers just yet, but we certainly managed to test a lot of approaches. In a moment, you're going to hear from my colleague Heather Claridge, who led this work along with her colleagues Carolina Gerard and indeed many others. And she'll give you a little flavour of the report that we're launching today. Following that, we've got Ian McDermott from Shetland Islands Council, who will be talking to us about the work there, and Kirsty Sweeney from Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. So that's the main running order of today. Before we get to Heather, though, we're able to introduce the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, Rosanna Cunningham, who has recorded a message for us. So if we could play that now, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to speak at your launch today. Firstly, I'd really like to convey the Scottish Government's support for Architecture and Design Scotland at this time of public health crisis, including your invaluable work to keep the climate emergency at the forefront of our green recovery. The climate emergency, of course, has not gone away, and we remain absolutely committed to a national just transition to net zero emissions by 2045. As Scotland emerges from COVID-19, we have a chance to build a greener, fairer and more equal society and economy. So I'm extremely impressed by the whole place approach to decarbonisation taken within the ANDS Carbon Conscious Places initiative. I strongly support your continuing exploration of how we design, plan and deliver places, and how that relates to our national response to climate change, decarbonisation, just transition and health inequalities. Your inclusion of such a wide variety of stakeholders, including landowners, key agencies, local community representatives and the business community, demonstrates your commitment as an organisation to a just transition to a net zero emission society in which nobody is left behind. So I congratulate ANDS for both developing and releasing this ambitious report during the COVID-19 pandemic. This demonstrates resilience and a determination to maintain the climate emergency at the forefront of our national thinking. The current context in which the report has been released illuminates crucial elements of our green recovery, which the Scottish Government is continuing to deliver, including improvements to active travel infrastructure, the delivery of quality open space and local level stakeholder empowerment. Support from organisations like yours is crucial to the Scottish Government's endeavour to continue pushing forward community level action and a place-based approach to decarbonisation. As identified in your report, a place designed for and with local people is fundamental to such thinking and to realising the Scottish Government climate action targets at all levels. We are continuing to provide significant funding and support for community climate action. This is a means of placing people's needs at the centre of decision making and of building local capacity for continued change from the ground up. In November 2019, I announced the creation of a network of community climate action hubs. The hubs will be spread across Scotland and will provide support in their local areas, helping groups to take advantage of community funding opportunities and promoting collaboration between projects. Further to this, I commit my full support to the principle of a place of small distances identified in the ANDS report as crucial to addressing the climate emergency. Building on the experience of COVID-19, we will work with COSLA and local government to take forward our ambitious new plans for 20-minute neighbourhoods, the creation of livable, accessible places with thriving local economies where people can meet their daily needs within a 20-minute walk. Our new model for community-level action against climate change will reflect on the strength of the community response to COVID-19 and on how communities have pulled together to meet local needs. Additionally, in line with the findings of your report, we are pushing forward funding and additional support for the creation of circular economies at all levels across Scotland to encourage nationwide reduction, reuse and repurposing. We will publish our updated climate change plan in December and continue to strive towards building a greener, fairer, more equal society and economy with the well-being of our people and planet at its heart. So the work that you are undertaking at ANDS to address the climate emergency is invaluable, and I look forward to seeing further exciting, innovative outcomes from the Designing for a Changing Climate project. It is organisations like yours who will be essential to our national endeavour for a just transition to net zero emissions by 2045. So thank you.
Some great words there from the Cabinet Secretary, and as I said earlier, really important to stress we couldn't have done this without her support and the support of her officials, so it's really good to have been able to work with them. Okay, now I'd like to introduce my colleague Heather Claridge, who is going to give you a taster of what is in the report. Heather, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Before I start, I'll just introduce myself so you have a face to the voice that's going to come with the presentation. I'm Heather Claridge. I'm a Principal Design Officer at Architecture and Design Scotland, and I've been on secondment from Glasgow City Council to help with this project. So let me share my screen and presentation with you. Great, hopefully you can all see that. So over the past year, we have been exploring what designing for a changing climate means to Scotland's places, where we consider a whole place approach to the net zero carbon challenge. Our work has been underpinned by a learning by doing approach, where we supported 4 local authorities to develop and implement spatial plans that prioritise decarbonisation. We picked these authorities due to their variation in geography, scales and stage of project they were at. However, each of them shared a desire to explore how to position climate change as a key driver for change. Of course, you'll hear more from Kirsty and Ian on their projects and the type of support we were able to offer. Alongside the work, the pilot work with the authorities, we collected a series of blogs ranging from aspects in terms of energy, food growing, brownfield reuse, mobility to behaviour change. And we also curated a public sector client forum online with presentations, talks and a live event. The learning from the combination of these activities helped us to shape our thinking into 2 reports which identify the practical learning from working with the authorities and key principles for developing carbon conscious places. There were 8 key principles which were identified to support a holistic approach to developing places to reduce, repurpose and absorb carbon and adapt to the impacts of climate change. These principles are of course interconnected, but they're not necessarily intended to be a definitive list or set of solutions. Instead, they outline important concepts to consider when shaping places. To give you a flavour of each of these principles, I'll briefly go through them. So the first principle, a place-led approach. This involves understanding, appreciating and working with existing assets, the surrounding landscape, the place identity, using the right type of intervention at the right stage, scale and location. An example of this can be found in the Place Standard tool, which allows different people to consider the existing social and physical resources of a place and explore how they can form the basis for any changes. Principle 2 is a place of small distances, as mentioned by the Cabinet Secretary. This encourages the creation of complete and self-sufficient neighbourhoods with everyday facilities and services within a short walking and cycling distance. Paris' 15-minute city concept or Melbourne's 20-minute neighbourhood, supporting proximity and diversity of use and carbon-conscious travel, can be recognised as examples. The next principle, leading on from the previous, is a network of small distance places. This involves connecting complete neighbourhoods to provide a network of places that support greater self-sufficiency and low carbon living, ultimately enabling people to live, work and play without generating unnecessary carbon emissions. The Borders Railway is an example of this in action, whereby the reopening of this route has resulted in significant modal shift from the car to public transport, estimated at 35,000 saved single car trips. Principle 4 is a place designed for and with local people. This involves placing people's needs at the centre of decision making, service provision and investment in our places, and ensuring they are actively involved in key stages of the design process. Devon Arts in Huntly, where they connected artists, communities and places through creative research and engagement, is a prime example of this. The next principle, a place that reuses, repurposes and considers whole life costs, champions the retrofitting of existing structures and brownfield sites first, giving consideration to the embodied carbon in place. This principle supports viewing structures as material banks with components which are demountable, rebuildable and reusable, and considering the cost of an entire life cycle of a structure rather than only its initial capital costs. The innovative retrofitting of Woodside high-rise flats in Glasgow by Collective Architecture and Queen's Cross Housing Association is a good example of this in action. Principle 6, a place with whole and circular systems. This involves enhancing, repairing and joining up different systems which support a healthy, carbon-conscious place. Sheffield's Grey to Green is an example of this principle, as it joined up the drainage, habitat and active travel networks to deliver wider climate, social and economic benefits. Our seventh principle is a place that supports sharing. This encourages the sharing of assets and services in a place to enable low carbon living and connect people to their neighbourhoods. From the micro to the macro, this can include sharing tools, bikes, electric vehicles, to accommodation and education facilities. Edinburgh's Tool Library is a good example of this because it shared tools, skills and knowledge in a place. And finally, our eighth principle is a place designed in time. This involves ensuring the place planning and delivery process considers the dimension of time, from long-term visions to short-term approaches to test ideas. The Glasgow Canal Project is a good example of this, as the partnership has linked long-term and meanwhile action together to successfully and collectively grow the place over time. Within the report, we have considered how these principles can apply at 4 settlement scales. Through rethinking how we move about, how we live, how we become more self-sufficient, we are able to consider different ways to address all scopes of carbon emissions and impacts of climate change. This will help us to deliver a carbon-conscious Scotland by 2050. The report provides an example of the story of change for each place. To give you a flavour of this, I'll share the story of our urban neighbourhood. This is a typical 2050 urban neighbourhood. Here, the local housing association has led the refurbishment of a block of existing tenements, which has been retrofitted to be highly energy efficient and support features such as collection of rainwater. A place standard engagement with the local community highlighted the need for better quality green space, more nature, better street drainage, paths and cycle routes. Street trees offer shade and shelter were introduced by the local authority as part of the town centre climate plan. Walking, cycling and wheeling are the common means of travel. Facilities such as health, education, local retail are close by, following the 20-minute neighbourhood concept that grew out of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The street still allows some access to vehicles such as delivery vans and emergency services, but these emit no emissions. There is also a bus stop at the end of the street, which is regularly served by electric buses. A local environment group obtained a grant to help transform the back courts of the tenements into attractive social and growing areas. The neighbourhood is a happy place to stay and has seen many families return to the urban centre to raise children due to high quality of life and facilities. The report goes on to explore the story of change for a city centre, setting out how and who might be involved to green buildings, retrofit rooftops, reprioritise the transport hierarchy and introduce more water resilient public realm. And in a town setting, the story of encouraging more local food networks, reuse of redundant road infrastructure into active travel corridors, and creating natural flood defences, delivering multiple benefits. And last but not least, in a rural centre, supporting more local essential services, the production and distribution of energy and food locally, and the restoration of peatland and woodland to balance carbon emissions and construction of eco-friendly affordable housing. So that was a real taster of the resources we've created following the pilot work. We hope you download the report, explore it in more depth, share it with colleagues, and encourage a whole place approach to designing for climate change. We are continuing the work with support from the Scottish Government, so if you think we can help you in your place, please do get in touch. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Heather. That was great. And as Heather said, you'll be able to access the full report at the end of today's event. I think that COVID-19's thrown into very sharp relief just how significant the issues outlined by Heather are. And you know, from our perspective, it's a great opportunity to be able to apply the principles of design and collaboration that we're used to working in an environment which needs them so much at this stage. So looking forward to hearing more from others as we go through. I should just say that we're getting a series of questions coming in, so there'll be an opportunity to put those to the panel towards the end of the event. So if anyone has got a question or indeed wants to say something about what they're hearing, please add it to the chat and we'll hopefully come to some of you before we close. So now we can move on to introducing the first of our local authority speakers. Kirsty Sweeney is a planning officer at Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, and she's the lead for the development of the work around Strathard. And I'm not really going to say very much more about it because I'm going to hand over to Kirsty to do that. But I think it's just another really good example of the rich nature of the mix of organisations and individuals who need to come together to have the conversations that this work reflects. So Kirsty, can I hand over to you? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Yes, you've just introduced myself there before I put my slides up, just the same as Heather. I do work in the Development Planning and Communities team at the National Park Authority, a very small team. And thank you very much for ANDS to invite me along today to speak about the project that I'm working on. So I'll just put on my slides for you to see. So first of all, where is Strathard? It's at the heart of the National Park Authority, the area that many of you may know as the Trossachs. And Aberfoyle is the main town, and the area is home to many lochs and the headwaters of the River Forth, which flow into Stirling, which you can see on this map. Here's a wee flavour of the area and photographs. It is dominated by forestry, high mountains, including Benvenue and Ben Lomond, which flank the area. The area has a single track road which leads you to a dead end at Loch Lomond, and the area has dotted with small communities such as Kinlochard and Stronachlacher. The economy is dominated by tourism, reflected in all the tourism accommodation, cafes and retail offering for tourists at the main street at Aberfoyle. There's been investment in the area, such as new run-of-river hydro schemes, which you can see in this photograph, new signage, and the place is reinventing itself as a home of gravel biking. And also the quieter lochs are becoming even more popular recently, with open water swimming, paddle boarding and canoeing, creating additional pressures. However, there has been long-standing other issues such as flooding in the area, lack of affordable housing and dependence on the car for both the locals and the visitors who come to the area, and this is having a negative impact. The project aim was to work in partnership using a co-design approach to create a framework that will become planning guidance. The co-design steering group includes Stirling Council and the community, and this is the first time I've ever actually worked in this way. And it has been extremely beneficial and been particularly lucky, to be honest, because we've had 3 very engaged community representatives guiding the process for the workshops and the framework. And also, of course, we've had ANDS, who joined the group early on to assist us in May 2019, before we actually became a pilot project on the decarbonisation. It was selected given the rural climate change aspects. So I just wanted to also point out it's not only going to become planning guidance, but it's also a land use framework. Because as a national park, we saw opportunities to look at the natural flood management, peatland restoration, forestry, and bring this together with planning. And think about that offsetting that Heather mentioned. So we're looking at that alongside development and community issues in relation to climate change and how to decarbonise the area. So we wanted to build on existing plans and strategies, which there are many of, and agree a shared vision across the community and partner organisations to create a healthier, more climate responsive Strathard that is economically thriving place to live, work and visit. So there was a lot of work to build on, such as the Strathard Initiative, an agency-led environmental project that covered land use issues, which happened in 2015. We also were building on the success of our 2 other frameworks in the East and West Loch Lomond, where we produced planning guidance there that was more prescriptive for the rural area. Also, there's been a lot of community work in this area. The community have been very driven, producing community action plans over a number of years, and most recently in 2019, they've been working on what they've called life plans, but effectively really local place plans. The plans set out the community vision and view of what they value about the area, their desires, wishes for land use, and also community project ideas. It's clear they greatly value their natural environment and wish to be involved in planning for their area. So this new framework is going to bring all this together and give really a focus in on all these issues, and it will become a material planning consideration, but also influence land use decisions. So what have we done so far? So ANDS worked closely with us and the steering group to develop the consultant's brief, highlighting the decarbonisation potential of the area and how the framework could address this. We then appointed Paz as our consultant to gather all the background information together, summarise it and also facilitate workshops. We've held 1 workshop so far in March, and a second one was cancelled due to COVID, but is planned for this month. The workshops were an opportunity to help raise awareness of the environment, the value of natural capital and understanding of how land use and planning can help address climate change. ANDS helped with the workshop, facilitating and running one of the sessions. They presented 2 different climate change focused scenarios using the timeline that you can see on the screen here from 2020 to 2050 to stimulate discussion between workshop participants. This worked really well and gave everyone a chance to consider how to prevent or enable a scenario. One of the scenarios would adversely impact on the place and the people, and the other would have a positive impact. This one shown on the slide is the one showing the positive impact. It included new ideas and also ideas that maybe thought of before, bringing everything together, such as affordable public transport and housing, a shift to electric transport, commercial diversification, a focus on green tourism, self-sufficiency, the food economy, and better connectivity. This really came out in the final consensus session that we had with the participants on the day about the vision for the area. They all agreed that they wanted joined up transport, local ownership, local employment, diversified woodland, affordable housing, clean energy generation. The next workshop, which was planned this month, we hope to draw out some of these local solutions to decarbonise the area. So how will the local economy diversify? Where will the live-work units be developed alongside affordable smaller units? If a new wetland park could be created and should be created on the floodplain, how a transport hub and network would work, and how to better connect services and improve placemaking in the village. But also considering land use issues to tackle climate emergency at a national scale, such as peatland restoration, woodland enhancement and planting. So I'd just like to finish up and thank ANDS for their input into the project, which has helped me keep focused on decarbonisation potential in the area. I hope you think this is a good example of place-based approach, integrating community, business stakeholders and agencies to help find solutions. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. That was really good. I think it's a tremendous way of demonstrating the partnership principles that are at the heart of this. For a place like the National Park, it's important as a kind of carbon absorbing landscape, but it's also a place where people live. So it really does underline the whole place approach that is at the heart of this kind of work. So thanks again, Kirsty. And I think the other thing that I was struck, actually, you talked about working this way and how you found that something that was quite kind of empowering. So I think that's, for me, one of the things that's at the heart of this. So it'd be interesting to maybe discuss that a little bit later on. Right, our second speaker from the local authority perspective is Ian McDermott from Shetland Island Council. I know Ian is the head of planning, but he's got some title that involves executive manager. I'm guessing that still does have planning at the heart of it. So Ian, would you like to talk about your experience leading the project, I think at NAB in Shetland?
Yes, I'm Ian McDermott, executive manager, what others would know as the head of planning at Shetland Islands Council. My presentation looks at the project for the redevelopment of the former Anderson High School site in the NAB area of Lerwick. This slide highlights the scale and importance of the site relative to Lerwick, the biggest town in Shetland. This is the Anderson High School site itself, with the former school buildings, listed buildings, etc. And this is the greater NAB area, with the graveyard, footpaths, walkways, public open space, and the connections into Lerwick, this is the old town centre here with the old harbour area, some of the newer development on the town, the new parts of the town, and just off the picture there is supermarkets, leisure centres, etc. The main town shopping street is down here. In this direction, off to the right slightly a little bit, is Norway, and off to the left a little bit is Greenland. So hopefully that gives you some sort of context of where we are and for the site. As I say, the site is a very important site. It's approximately the same size as the town centre itself, prominent location overlooking the harbour area, and also has a cultural significance as a centre of education for many of Shetland's population. The proposed development includes 120 housing units of mixed types and tenure, the reuse of the listed school buildings, the development of links to the town and community facilities, and the creation of public realm. So a bit of background to the site. It was a political decision to relocate the school to a new site. Was it a carbon conscious decision? Well, no. There was really no actual plan what to do with the site when the decision was made. and a previous chief executive was quite keen to sell the site off on a plot by plot basis. But the planning service saw it as a great opportunity for a public sector led development based on the place principle. So working with Dermot Lawler and Architecture and Design Scotland, we held workshops with firstly locals and users of the NAB area, then politicians, and then took the results to service providers. And the initial workshop's content was very much a place-based approach, and the content was an early iteration of the place standard, which Shetland was an early adopter. The planning service led on a development brief, and the council adopted a master plan as supplementary guidance after full community engagement. The master plan was drawn up by 7 architects working alongside council colleagues, and has won many awards and was lined up for the Scotland Pavilion at the Venice Biennale this year. The NAB is also a flagship project for Shetland in the Islands deal, which is our version of the city or region deals. Part of the Islands deal bid is for a cultural hub and creative space in the old school listed buildings. And was the project carbon conscious at this point? Well, yes, as any project involving a planning department would be, but we did struggle to get our message across. We were wanting to talk about United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but we seem to spend most of our time talking about car parking spaces, unfortunately. Ahead of planning Scotland meeting, I heard about the ADS decarbonisation project, and although it was fair to say the ADS were sceptical about having the NAB as one of the pilot projects, given that we were close to implementation, we were included. So what did the project do? The report gives you a good understanding of what went on, but from my take on it, we were thinking about how things evolved and developed, and ADS created a series of workshops which firstly brought together the council project team and most of the members of our corporate management team. This had not been possible before, but highlights the benefit of having a national organisation with recognised experts in the field leading our sessions. We focused on the existing work streams of demolition, public realm, infrastructure, housing and reuse of listed buildings, and ADS introduced another theme of social capital. We looked at carbon reduction issues from a Shetland, then Lerwick, and finally site-specific perspective. The ADS created scenarios featuring fictitious characters representing the future inhabitants of the site, and then these discussions were brought together in another session, this time with councillors and representatives of community interests. So what did the project do for us? The project brought the NAB project team and others together for the first time to focus on carbon reduction, and that's really important when we think about our green recovery plans. It showed that it's never too late to focus on carbon matters in any project. The ADS reports will help us to build an innovative, carbon-conscious development, which is important in its own right, but also plays a fundamental part in our Islands deal bid to Scottish and UK government. As well as putting the carbon reduction at the core of placemaking, the workshop also highlighted to us the crossover between carbon reduction, health and well-being, transport and inequality issues. And my final point, I attended the ANDS and RIAS Andy McMillan Memorial Lecture. And if I may quote Jude Barber of Collective Architecture, this is the moment all things we have been talking about have come to the fore. Response to climate change, inequality and health. She was talking primarily about architecture that is equally applicable to any part of the development process. The Carbon Conscious Places report and its 8 principles is a vital piece in that jigsaw. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. A very different context, I think, to the project in Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, but I think the same kind of powerful messages around collaboration, around the kind of leadership side that the public sector showed in those cases. So I think very strong parallels there for me as well. Right, that's the end of our kind of presentation phase. So we're going to move into some questions. I know that Karen is collating those from the various bits and pieces that have been shared on the chat. So before we come to those questions, can I maybe just start things rolling with one of my own? And this is for each of the panelists, so I'll come to each of you in turn. I'm going to start with the local authority ones for reasons that will become obvious. I'd like you to share with me what unexpected outcome or what was the most unexpected thing of being involved in this project that you might have spotted as you go along. Kirsty, can I come to you with that one first?
I suppose the most unexpected thing really was at the workshops itself, when we were sitting round the table with a very diverse group of people with lots of different interests, from the business community to the councils to large landowners and community representatives, and you're presenting them with this scenario to 2050, which, to be honest, when I had first looked at, thought it looked quite scary prospect for everyone to kind of take on board. But actually, in reality, everyone was really quite open to the idea, and it is actually really surprising how much, even whatever background they're for, there is this really drive, I feel, from the Scottish public and like everyone out there to kind of tackle climate change and do something about it. And it just, yeah, it really surprised me and gave me hope for the future, that everyone was not as shocked as maybe I thought they were going to be.
That's great, Kirsty. A pleasant surprise, so
Yes.
That's always a good one. Ian, what about you? Anything unexpected that you came across during the project?
Unexpected. I don't know. There was lots of surprises, I suppose. But I think, to me, same point really. It was heartening to hear various people who you had worked with for many years talking about carbon conscious issues, and sometimes it was quite surprising to hear people who you thought have no particular great interest or knowledge of it and what they could chip into the conversation. So I think that was the point I was trying to make about bringing all these different people from different parts of the project team together to focus on this particular issue. And I think that was a pleasant surprise as well, I suppose, from my perspective.
That's great, Ian, and again, really, really heartening and encouraging, because I suspect those sorts of senses would be repeated right across the country when we look at other areas. Okay, Heather, would you like to share any surprises from your perspective?
Yeah, I suppose I would echo what Kirsty and Ian have said about actually climate change being this kind of uniter, and I think we sort of felt that, but actually how much that was accepted, you know, by all the different diverse interests was unexpected. I suppose unexpected, and it's picking up on the point that Ian made. You know, when we originally did the call out for pilot projects, we were looking for people at quite an early stage of the thinking of a big kind of place. So when NAB came to us, or Ian came to us with the NAB project, because it had already been adopted as a master plan, we were having to think about, well, at this stage in the process, how much can we actually help? But it was something, because, you know, the project implementation team had been set up, they were at that practical level to think, right, you know, we've got a project here, we're going to lead it, we want to do it, you know, public led, you know, in a good way. How can we genuinely actually make this really carbon conscious, even though it hadn't necessarily been explicitly at the stage, as Ian said? So I think from our point of view, it was unexpected, because we felt actually it doesn't matter what stage of a project's at, you can still do, you know, help, add value, you know, join things up, apply the place principle. So I think that was a nice unexpected you know, thing from the project I'm working in NAB.
Great, thanks, Heather. And again, something that's really reassuring to hear, because rarely do you get the opportunity to start where you'd want to start on any piece of work. So good that those things can be woven in. Right, okay, can I bring Karen in now, who's been sifting through the various questions and suggestions and comments that we've had, and maybe offer me a couple to throw out to the panel?
Okay, so I just want to say thank you to everyone that's entered some questions. We've had quite a varied selection. I'm only going to pick a few because of the time. But Jim, to start off with, I think asking how important was capturing the lived experience in creating the 8 principles in action?
Okie doke. So how important was catching a lived experience in terms of the 8 principles? Ian, do you want to try and field that one?
Yeah, we have this. A lived experience is quite difficult in terms of the NAB because actually nobody lives on the site at the moment. So it's not like you're working on something to improve people's existing environment, I suppose. But certainly it was important going back to the very early stages, working with ADS and Dermot Lawler back in those days to get people who used the area to have an input and engagement. I think that was kind of important, and it's something we built on in terms of that community participation and engagement. Some of the ideas that were coming back from the people at the very early stages, they did not want to just see the site being wall-to-wall housing. They felt there was more to it, and it could add more to the area and to Lerwick as a whole, rather than just building what is much needed houses. So I think, in many ways, that was the starting point for us. And then everything else that came afterwards built on that. So the carbon conscious elements of that built onto what we had already learned from our early engagement with the people on the site.
Okay, Karen, about another one.
Yeah. Okay, so John's asked, what is the most carbon conscious place in Scotland, whether it's a town, and why? Does anyone have any ideas about that at the moment?
Right, well, that's a very straightforward question, which I'm sure my colleague Heather would be delighted to field and indeed answer. Heather, do you want to have a stab at the most carbon conscious place in Scotland? Other than the 2 representative corps, which we already accept are 2 of the leaders.
Yeah, I think, Jim, you could see the panic in my eyes as you were fielding the question my way. I think it's a really, it's a tricky question. I think when you look at the 8 principles that we've developed off the back of the pilot work and the blogs that we got and the public sector client forum, I think there isn't necessarily a place that epitomises all of those ones. So the hope is that every place, be it a new place that's being planned like NAB, or a place like Strathard, which has already got, existing settlements and it's developing a bit, new developments and thinking about balance of kind of land use. I think all of them could apply the 8 principles or some of the 8 principles to think I could do a bit more in terms of sharing, or I could do a bit more. So I'm sort of shifting the question. I'm not necessarily answering it here, but I think, the hope is that we will see more places being planned that, as we said, the 8 principles aren't a definitive set of solutions, but if you start to apply some of those in a place, you will find more of those. And I think also the idea, the message that we were trying to say is that whole place approach. I think we have good examples of, energy efficient buildings or, new developments which are thinking about how can we, be really energy efficient or, offset our energy. But I think it has to be that whole place approach where we're thinking about reducing, repurposing and absorbing as well as adapting. So I think we haven't got that, that kind of key place to point to, but we're all striving for it, and places are at different levels.
Thanks, Heather, and very deftly dealt with, I would say, in terms of an unfair question. Again, I think just to add to that, it is a terrible tendency to try and rank everything and look for what's the best, and obviously sharing excellence and sharing good practice is important. But I think what Heather was outlining there is that actually it's not about looking at the best and copying. It's about looking to your own area and doing the best with what you've got. And I think that's definitely something to think about quite carefully. Karen, another question if you have one.
Okay, so hopefully this one might be slightly more straightforward or not, because it's from Anonymous. So they're saying the local authority continues to support previous commitments to greenfield release, which directly contradicts many of the principles we've just been discussing in relation to placemaking and decarbonisation. Could the ANDS work help to influence difficult decisions that need to help in reviewing projects that are have currently been approved or been working on?
Okay, well, Kirsty, you can probably guess this is coming your way. As somebody working in a local authority environment, I'll try and couch this in the best terms, but it's not an untypical situation. So I guess based on the experience you had in the project, could you see this kind of work helping a situation where a historic planning decision, be it a land allocation or an application permission rather, is perhaps working against the carbon conscious agenda? Could this work offer a kind of positive rather than adversarial route through that, or do you see things being perhaps more challenging than that?
Exactly, I do see that this work is very key to that and bringing everyone together. And we in the Strathard area have got an issue with a historical permission, exactly what you're saying, on a bit of land that where we, you know, it's not where we would necessarily plan for development. And these discussions, especially in the next workshop, I hope it comes through as to, you know, how we deal with that situation, how we move forward from it. But I think this, I suppose, in response to that whole question and just that pressure to develop greenfield land, and I was thinking about it the other night, and just in terms of this framework and just in terms of local place plans and just the change that we're seeing at the moment from this bottom-up approach. And I think the planning system is changing for the good in terms of how we can help climate change, because we're planning from the bottom up, where the communities are coming forward for these ideas. And often, even when Ian was talking there about the NAB community wanting a mixed use development, often the communities, you know, have the ideas and can see the future better than maybe how we would plan it, and also they're having a bigger voice in planning. And I think that can only help in terms of tackling some of this greenfield land release, because the plan-led system before was maybe a bit broken in that sense. So yeah, that would be my take on it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kirsty, and that's an excellent response. And I think it is worth highlighting that whole place doesn't mean perfect place. This isn't the pursuit of the perfect at the expense of the very good. And you know, the sorts of things that we will always encounter as these historic decisions, and the real context of who owns and controls land and all the rest of it. So it's again that message that you're giving there about creating the best possible place in the widest possible interest, which I think again is something we'd want everyone to kind of take from this. Right, Karen, other questions that we could maybe
so I've got two that are coming from the same sort of direction, place, from Alan and Jay. So one is suggesting that the UN is highlighting that we've got 11 to 12 years to take a serious reduction in CO2, and that's just perhaps 1 to 2 LDP planning and design cycles. Realistically, is this the last chance we have to produce local plans? With the limited funding, we should be focusing more on living and what we have, rather than planning and dreaming of futures that are unlikely to happen on the timescales needed to get to net zero. And Jay's question is, are the 8 principles or any other themes best practice established through this working likely to be brought forward as part of the NPF4?
Okie doke. Right, can I park the NPF4 one in a minute, but I'd be quite interested to hear each of the panel's views on whether this is the last chance to develop carbon zero local plans. Ian, can I come to you again?
Yes. That's it.
There we go. Simple as that. We'll let you expand on it in a minute. But Kirsty, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I mean, I would just agree with Ian. Yeah, I mean, we have to take action now. It's a climate emergency. After all, so yes, it is extremely important that we act now and to think about our futures.
Good. Heather, from what you've seen around the country, do you think we've got plenty of time, or is this last chance saloon?
I think, yeah, I would agree. You know, we need to embed climate and place as a kind of almost key drivers of local development plans. I suppose the one thing I would add is saying that, you know, if we embed climate and place as drivers, we can also deliver all the other things that, you know, Scotland needs to do. So we've got, you know, a housing shortage, we've got health crisis. So actually, you know, as we've seen, using climate and place as almost the drivers can address these other things. So I think, you know, we have got we have to do this at pace, but we can't lose sight of the other things we're also trying to deliver. So, as the Cabinet Secretary talks about, that fairer and just transition, there are other, things that we need to take into consideration, as well as net zero carbon targets. So I think that's the challenge, but also the exciting opportunity that presents itself. So I think, yes, we have to embed it into local development plans, and we have to do that now, but we can't lose sight of the other things we're also trying to deliver as well.
That's good. We've just got time to kind of turn ourselves to that final question, which was the extent to which the 8 principles might be reflected in the National Planning Performance Framework's 4th iteration. Can I turn it round slightly and say, given what you've just heard, can the NPF4 afford not to include these 8 principles when it's published? Ian, do you want to expand at slightly greater length on that?
Okay, if you insist. Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about all the discussions that were happening on NPF4 pre-COVID, I suppose, then it was very much heading in that direction. And just because we've had a pandemic doesn't mean these other things go away. I do think that, thinking about the other question about local development plans, there's always that feeling we can't do things and we can't change things and people aren't going to change. I mean, I take it back to that bit about everybody wants 2 car parking spaces outside their house and wants to drive to the supermarket and stuff like that. Well, actually, we've demonstrated in the last few months that people's behaviour can change just like that. And imagine if half the effort had been put into stopping flights or travel or carbon emissions to deal with the climate situation instead of a COVID situation. We'd be halfway there to do what we needed to do. So yeah, I think NPF4 has got to be the backbone of what we're trying to do. The LDPs have got to carry that forward. But we really don't have a lot of time to do that. And I think the planners are going to be at the forefront of trying to make that happen.
Yeah, and just finally, can I come to Heather? Heather, you've been involved a little in supporting NPF4. Do you think there's a prospect of these principles being folded into it?
Yeah, I definitely think, as we talked about, they're not a definitive list of solutions, but I think they are a good way, a good lens to consider. And I think, yeah, definitely we would hope, and we've been doing a bit of work to translate them into a national level, a regional level, and a local development plan level, which wasn't necessarily as you saw from our project, we were working very much at that kind of place scale, or Strathard was the biggest area we were looking at. So yeah, absolutely. I think you have to take it at that, national, regional and local level, as well as doing that bottom up, as Kirsty talked about. So I think there's a good prospect of some of the ethos of them being embedded into NPF4.
Great. Thanks, Heather, and thanks to all of the panel. We're out of time, I'm afraid, for any more questions, but we are capturing everything that's being shared in terms of comments, so it's not lost. So really that kind of brings things to a close. I want to just say a few final words. Thank the speakers, thank those people who asked some questions as well. Thank all of the audience for joining us. I should say now that our reports are live on the website, so if you go to the website, you'll be able to download those, and hopefully you'll be able to read those as well. And we'd love to hear from you once you've done so. There's lots more things on our website, and you're very welcome to dig into that as well. I think it's also worth stressing that our work is not finished with the publication of these reports. We continue to work alongside partners on similar contexts across the country, looking to use and apply the principles that you can find in the report to places of all scales, all shapes and sizes. So if you are involved in a project like that, or you would like to be involved in a project like that in your area, please get in touch. We would, along with the Scottish Government, be continuing to support you to do that. So it just falls to me to thank everybody, and particularly my team, Karen, Irini, Anya and Laura, who've been busy away behind the scenes, making sure everything works smoothly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your interesting project, and I would normally say safe home, but safe onward day and whatever else you're doing. But thanks very much for your interest, and goodbye.